Hey, so quite a a challenge to follow all these great talks, inspiring talks. I don't think I've been to a conference where I've been sort of almost brought to tears on more than one occasion. Yeah, tough acts to follow. Not that button. All right. Okay. So hi, I'm Mischa. I'm a UXer. And I currently head up design at a startup called Cognition. And prior to that, I was leading teams at various agencies, big and small, big corporate tech companies and startups. So Cognition is focused on enabling companies, little and large, to get the most out of this slew of new capabilities and technologies that we kind of collectively call artificial intelligence, or at least that are powered by artificial intelligence. It's allowing people and companies to bridge that gap between the problems they have and the solutions that are out there. And the gap, the space in between is the sort of lack of knowledge that most people outside of big tech companies with expensive AI specialists just don't have, right? And so our mission is to empower people with that access, cheap access to the right expertise to solve their problems. As a side, we run a great and big festival of all things AI. It's a big conference that we've been running over the last couple of years. We'll be running it again this summer. It's called CogX. If you're interested, do check it out. It is probably one of the biggest and best in the world, certainly in Europe. So what are we going to talk about today? As Simon said, we're going to talk about user experience when AI makes decisions. And this is a topic that has been touched on in some of the talks so far. But more specifically, I'd like to talk about a subset of those experiences where humans are using AI that makes some decisions. AI that makes some of those decisions. It's a class of experiences where humans are collaborating with new intelligently powered software. And I think that this is an area that's going to push design into new places and demand us to think in new ways and develop some new skills. So I'm going to start off by just putting a bit of historical context around what's happening with AI and what's leading to these kinds of experiences. And then just taking a look at a couple of these types of experiences to sort of understand their shape and their characteristics a little more, and then just explore some of the implications. So firstly, a little bit of history. We've already touched on the idea of AI as augmentation. And augmentation really has this kind of long history, and AI is just really part of that continuum. We started off really with this idea of augmenting our bodies. Here, perhaps most powerfully, humanity discovered the horse in about 4,500 years BC with a tribe called the Yamnaya coming down from the Ukrainian plains to Western Europe. And such is the power of this kind of biotech augmentation that the Yamnaya tribes completely replaced all of the males in the existing gene pool of Western Europe. Just think about that. They were so successful militarily that they literally wiped out the existing population, the men. They took the women. So that's the power of augmenting our bodies. Well, as they say, the pen is mightier than the sword, and with the pen we augmented our minds. So the Sumerians first invented writing with cuneiform and developed the ability to record financial contracts and their literary feats. And in the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so they're augmenting their long-term memories. But the pen, more importantly, allows us to augment our puny working memories. It allows us to think thoughts that we just couldn't think if we were doing it in our mind's eye. So Euclid, in his famous book, The Elements, was able to devise the rules of geometry. If he couldn't use a pen to play with shapes and to experiment with his conceptions of geometry, there's no way he could have done that work. Steve Jobs saw the computer in this perspective. He talked about a paper he read that studied the efficiency of different forms of motion in the animal kingdom, finding that the condor was, the most efficient animal in terms of, the energy it used to move around. But then the human's use of the bicycle was twice as efficient as the condor, the pinnacle of evolution's work on motion. That humans' gift to bring tools to bear on the problems they faced allows them to kind of outstrip nature. And so he thought of the computer as the most powerful tool that we'd yet invented. And he talked about it as the bicycle for the mind, which then, of course, he went on to use to inspire his ad agencies to create a kind of memorable and famous ad campaign talking about the Macintosh as wheels for the mind. So to recap, a human is a powerful thing, augmented physically, a more powerful thing, and augmented still further with cognitive augmentation is even more powerful. But really where humans get their power is in organizations, is in many people working together with a common purpose. So this happens in a couple of ways. A person can be can be a cog in the machine, can be doing things as part of an organization. So this lady is told where to go, what to pick, for whom and for where. She's part of an algorithm. She's a physical cog in a larger machine. A cog that, for now, is easier to implement with a human rather than a robot. And as we all know, that for this particular job will increasingly no longer be the case. But, of course, humans are also play a hugely important role in organizations as, in a sense, information processing units as part of a larger, a larger kind of algorithm, if you will. Edwin Hutchins, in a somewhat neglected but very important book called Cognition in the Wild, did extensive ethnographic studies of naval teams on ships, and he made a deep critique of the typical cognitive psychology's attempt to study cognition, which isolated cognition in a single mind doing a single task. Whereas, in fact, when you actually look at work in an organized team, people are acting as cognitive units that are meshed together, that as a whole are doing cognitive work. So this chart shows essentially how the team passes tasks from one part of the ship to the other, with each role in that kind of naval team doing very specialized pieces of work, which often involve taking an input, perhaps a bearing or a heading, and making marks on a chart, drawing a line, and then that means that they can then pass a number further up the chain to the next person, and the information filters along this chain until it gets up to the top, to the captain, who has this kind of processed, kind of condensed information that allows them to make the decisions they need to make. Cognition in the wild is a realization that, and a very beautiful and subtle way of thinking about how information processing happens within an organization. So in an organization, people execute physical tasks. People act in a way as robots, and then people act as information processors. Information comes in, it's processed, it's mapped, decisions are made, and then those things are executed in the real world. As we brought tools and machines into our organizations, into our factories, in our places of work, we've been able to reduce the amount of physical work that we need to do on the factory floor, on the farm, in the office. As computers have been brought to bear, we've been able to use them to do some of that information processing. AI is the next step in this process and this history of augmentation. We're able to do more and more sophisticated information processing. We're able to embed AI into our machines and do more sophisticated execution with machines. Does this mean that there's less for humans to do, as kind of the narrative has often been taken? I think history probably serves to show that eventually, at least, that won't be the case. Yes, humans will be doing a smaller, taking a smaller slice of the pie, but the pie will grow. So that's it. That's kind of what I want to cover with the history, to sort of show where, this AI is about augmentation. It's about the human and the machine. It's part of a long history. And I don't really want to focus on the idea of, or experiences where AI makes all the decisions, such as for this lady, or even this young man. But really, I want to focus on this situation where AI makes some of the decisions, makes the little decisions, because that's really where the action is. So let's take an example. One of the companies we cover at Cognition X, HireVue. So this is basically a SaaS service for HR teams. And what it allows your HR professional to do is to, when they get a new job profile in, they can upload it to the system. It'll automatically pick out the kind of recommended questions and skills that you might want to use to evaluate candidates for a particular job. And the HR professional can adjust that, decide exactly what they want the candidates to be evaluated against and what questions they want to be asked. And then they can put that interview out into the world, and all the candidates can come along and, at the time of their choosing, do an interview, not with a person, but with an AI. They essentially, on their phone or on their laptop, do a kind of video call, answer the questions posed, and as that call ensues, their emotions are detected, their speech is transcribed, their answers are scored, and their reactions and the way they answer the questions is factored into those scores. They might then proceed to do one of these game-based assessments that are also offered by these sorts of companies, in this case, Arctic Shores, where instead of a 1 hour pencil and paper sort of test, they can engage in a much more compelling and shorter sort of game-type experience, which sort of serves to score them on, again, the kind of criteria that are important for the job. It could be verbal, visual, abstract reasoning tasks. And the result comes back to the HR professional. Potentially tens of thousands of candidates can be efficiently processed, ranked, scored, and the top however many candidates can then be taken into the more traditional interviewing process. So what this does is this takes away what had been a huge pile of CVs that might either take a lot of laborious sorting through or maybe even never get looked at, and allows the HR professional to really focus on the high-value stuff of interviewing the sort of really promising potential candidates. So AI is making the little decisions so that people can spend more time on the bigger ones. Another interesting case is Stitch Fix. So this is a US company that's coming to the UK that their basic proposition is that they will send you clothes, 5 clothes, a week, or 5 pieces of clothing, a week, a month, depending on your preference, and you don't even have to choose them. They just turn up, right? And if you don't like them, you just send them back at no cost. So the trick, the rub here, is that they have to be really good at recommending the right clothes. Otherwise, they're going to start losing a whole lot of money on all those returns that they're having to pay for. So this is part of an emerging pattern in AI called humans in the loop. And this is a kind of collaboration I've been talking about. So the machines do what they're good at. They keep an eye on the inventory. They put together a long list of recommendations based on the user's profile and previous rejections and the questionnaire they fill in at the start. And that list goes to a stylist that is picked by the algorithm based on their propensity to make good, high-value recommendations for that particular type of customer. The stylist can then choose the shortlist of 5 items, and then the computers take over again and deal with all the logistics and routing. So here, when AI makes the little decisions, people can focus on what they're actually good at. Oops. I'm not sure what happened there. Right. So what does this all mean for designers? So let's go back to something that was mentioned earlier, Kasparov's iconic defeat by IBM's Deep Blue. What did he do after that defeat? After probably recovering from severe depression, he was spearheaded a new movement in chess called centaur chess, or advanced chess. And this is chess where grandmasters play with a computer. They play another human being. So these two guys here, they're playing each other. They've both got computers. And what they're doing is they're combining the abilities of the computers. They're looking at what the computer says they should do, and then they're thinking about it. And they're using their own skills as strategic thinkers and humans who understand the human that's sitting across them to make the final decisions. And for a while at least, I'm not sure if they're doing very well against the likes of AlphaZero, but for a while at least, these centaur teams beat even the best chess computers, because they were able to combine the best of human and computing decision-making. So here, and this is what is important here, is that it's not just about throwing them together, it's about throwing them together with the right process. When you create a human and AI team, the hard part is the plus. As designers, we need to focus on that plus and designing that new interface between machine and human. So now I'd like to take a look at some design directions. And this is an emerging field, so I don't think we have kind of hard and fast answers. We have things that we need to start thinking about. And here are a few. One of the things we need to start providing in these types of experiences is an ability for people to ask questions that empower them to get the right answers. In a wonderful essay Nikki Case says, AIs are best at choosing the answers. They're best at optimizing over huge data sets. They're best at searching across thousands of medical records or law cases. But humans are best at choosing the answers, the questions. Humans are best at choosing, what legal precedent they're looking for, or what medical condition they might need to consider. And this kind of job of this problem of creating UIs that allow us to use AI to find the right answers is something that has really been explored very fully in the world of generative design. So I'd like, if we could, up in the heavens there, to switch over to a short video.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only where needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. But generative design can be about much.
So there you see, glimpses of a tool, Dreamcatcher, that allows an industrial designer not to creatively design a product, but to set the right parameters, to ask the right questions, to set the right goals, and to explore the possibilities that satisfy and meet those parameters, right? And you can see in that tool that there's essentially a presentation of a solution space that probably there is an exploration through on the part of the designer. And this is where I think we need to come back to some older thinking in the field of HCI from a pioneer from Xerox PARC, Lucy Suchman, who was an ethnographer. She was called in to at Xerox to kind of try and understand why the kind of AI of the time, the expert system, that had been built to make an intelligent photocopier, if such a thing were ever needed, why it was just such a disaster. They'd had the best brains of the era working on this fancy AI to make using a photocopier more efficient, and no one could use it. And she used her sociology and ethnographic skill set to understand the holistic picture of what was going on. And what she found was that actually the issues with the expert system were rooted in a misconception that the engineers had brought to the problem, which was that people turned up at the photocopier with a clear goal in mind and a clear plan of how to execute on that goal. Whereas in fact, the way people almost always work is with very vague plans and actions that are situated in a context that evolve and are a response to that context. That we are essentially on a journey that we don't really know what the destination is, and we're kind of working our way, we're finding our way as we go through things. And if you take this back to this context of working with intelligent or these sophisticated AI-powered tools where we should be asking questions, you start to see this as this iterative conversation with the software where you ask a question, you see answers. That helps you figure out a better question to ask. You ask a new question, and then you get new answers, and the conversation goes on. It's your goals and your questions are situated in the context of the answers you're getting. And I think this also becomes important from a kind of existential and philosophical point of view, some of the kind of critiques of AI from the likes of Nick Bostrom, or that AI could pose a existential risk to us, because if we set it the wrong goals and it optimizes for those goals, it could cause us great harm, because we didn't know what we were asking for. And it's like all these old Greek parables of people who wish for the wrong thing and end up, like Midas and his golden touch, end up in terrible trouble. And so, as designers, in creating experiences that help people ask the right question, ask powerful questions, we actually could be part of the solution to this problem of what they call goal alignment. We can help people guide AIs to have the right goals. Our interfaces, our experiences need to be human-focused, not only user-focused. AIs are happiest with vast sets of multidimensional data, with complex numerical data, with lat longs, not 3 words. Humans are not. So how do we create outputs that are consumable? In the case of a lot of these systems, resort to a safely ranked linear list, perhaps with a rating on each item. But it gets more sophisticated than that. At Stitch Fix, they put a lot of work, they do a lot of data science and AI work into deriving the optimal outputs, the optimal summaries of the results. So, for example, the clothing recommendations in this case, that will allow the stylist to make the right decisions, will allow the stylist to add complementary judgments to those of the algorithm. The algorithm knows what's in stock and what isn't, right? It doesn't need the human to help them with that. The algorithm needs the human to have empathy with the customer, to be able to understand whether that particular piece of clothing, in the box with these shoes and that cravat is going to be a good package, right? The algorithm's going to have a hard time doing that. And the summaries, the outputs, are critical in encouraging that complementary input. Also, we need to create outputs that leverage our superpowers. So one example of that is our very rich visual system, our ability to absorb huge numbers of data points, as the guys from Quantum Blackwell know, in one glance. Another topic that's important here is that AIs need to be straightforward about the outputs that they're putting forward. They need to be understandable, but they also need to be honest. At Cognition X, we're working behind the scenes on a chatbot that allows people to ask natural language questions about their business problems and get answers about what kind of AI-powered tooling is out there to help them. But under the covers, quite a messy, complicated answer. So we need to simplify. So here you ask a question: what are the best solutions for candidate selection? And you get a nice, simple answer of, well, here are the 3 best products. But are we simplifying too much? How does the user know that how well the algorithm really understood them, how confident it is in those results? Is it any more confident here than here, where it actually gets it completely wrong? It uses very much the same outputs. AI, despite being based on binary sort of logic and technology, is not a matter of ones and noughts. It's not certainty. It's probability, it's shades of gray, it's levels of confidence. So we need to balance the simplicity and the need for kind of that straightforward, usable interface with the need for honesty about the uncertainty inherent in most AI outputs. So we need to develop a rich UI of uncertainty. There are some well-trodden paths here. Netflix makes good use of rankings and orderings and particularly percentage confidence matches. One could argue that how meaningful these are actually to users. How much meaning do I get out of 98 versus 95? Everything's, or 5.5 stars versus, 4.5 stars versus 5. There are kind of some problems that can be better solved here. The typical use of a ranked ordered list in a lot of these HR systems. But how can we make perhaps more nuanced use of copy to actually just honestly state the level of confidence in an output? Can we pioneer maybe some different visual approaches to create some visual affordances to kind of clearly mark out levels of certainty? So finally, I'd like to talk, and this is something that we covered to some degree in some of the earlier talks. There's this important interplay between how transparent an AI is and how much we trust it. Going back to these HR tools, they help overwhelmed HR professionals sift through tens of thousands of CVs that might otherwise not be read. Their great promise is they look beyond our, perhaps regrettable, well, certainly regrettable biases that we try to not put into place, but probably a lot of people do anyway, that they look beyond race, they look beyond gender and age. But how do you know? How do you know that someone hasn't been unfairly overlooked? What if they claim they've been overlooked? How can you go, if you have a black box algorithm, that's what most of these are, how do you interrogate that to answer their claims in court? It's a big issue. And one important thing to do here is to build trust through transparency. And this is very much an emerging field of work in the kind of AI research space. Is what algorithmically can you do to build that layer of transparency? And I'll just give a couple of examples which are actually covered in an article from McKinsey. So one example is this: the LIME algorithm, local interpretable model agnostic explanations. So they're able to isolate out the different parts of the image that led to a particular classification decision. So in this case, the 54% confidence classification of this image of a tree frog comes from analysis of the points around the face, whereas the billiard ball answer comes from a different part of the image. Similarly, there are attention-based techniques, which again can route back to the actual kind of input data to show you where a particular inference was made. So inferences that were made in a review about food quality came from these words versus service came from these other words. And you start to see how, while under the hood, these algorithms are coming to light that allow us to create this layer of transparency, there's a whole world of UI that's going to have to be invented to kind of expose these results to users in consumable and simple ways. Another approach is to kind of throw away the black box approach and just to rely on, or primarily on more simple heuristics. Famously, as Amazon has done for many years, customers who bought this also bought that. But I think that's to kind of ignore the kind of great power of these very sophisticated, multi-dimensional essentially black box algorithms. I think we need to use that power, and we just need to find ways to kind of expose the kind of the crux of why it's recommending what it is, which will always, to some degree, be a simplification. So again, it goes back to this question of honesty as well, to say, well, it's mostly about that. And finally, we need to use brand as part of the way we build and communicate trust. And this is fraught. We can look at the different voice assistant brands and see how this is played out. Siri started the charge here with a very ambitious and rich, very highly personified, branded assistant. It was a great brand. The only trouble is that the delivery didn't really match up to what the brand was promising. Google started with a much, much more pared back brand around their assistant, and actually turned out to be a wise choice. It wasn't a great piece of branding. It wasn't a great piece of advertising, but it didn't overpromise. It was a better match between delivery, which is obviously important to build trust. If you continually fail your users, trust is going to melt away really quickly. But if you don't have a brand that communicates that trust, then you can't communicate properly, you lose that memorability. And so I think Google and perhaps Alexa as well have matched and married the kind of the brand with the delivery in a more effective way than Siri. So finally, some closing thoughts here is that in a future where designers are helping to create an ever more computerized and machine-driven world, I feel we need to be ever more humane in our craft as designers. We need to think really carefully and deeply about how to create empowered centaurs and not beaten down worker drones. In the age of shrink-wrapped software, there was a focus on usability and learnability. And as the web took hold, we began to focus more on conversion, engagement, abandonment. Paradoxically, perhaps in the age of AI, we need to focus on humaneness and humanity. Thanks.